West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
The upcoming Senate elections in November are the most important Senate elections in our history. Our next guest, who has written 3 books about the Senate, Ira Shapiro, writes, "Make no mistake, the Senate's performance during the Trump presidency is the story of the most catastrophic failure of government in American history. That failure undermined the rule of law and threatened our constitutional rights. It deepened our divisions, pitting red states against blue states, whites against blacks. It endangered our national security, weakening our alliances and strengthening our adversaries. It caused many thousands of Americans to die needlessly before their time. It led directly to the insurrection at the Capitol. America had no defense against the novel threat presented by the unholy alliance between Trump and the Senate Republican leader, Mitch McConnell. Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, in a moment of anger, correctly observed that the founders had not contemplated the combination of a rogue president and a rogue majority leader. Joining us now is Ira Shapiro, who served for 40 years in senior staff positions in the United States Senate. He is the author of the new book, The Betrayal: How Mitch McConnell and the Senate Republicans Abandoned America. Ira, thank you very much for joining us tonight. I love this book. It's one of those couldn't put it down stories for me. And I have to say, as the Trump presidency was approaching, I was actually expecting Mitch McConnell to be the kind of power player that we've seen in both parties as a majority leader of the Senate and tell the president what he could and could not do. Why didn't that happen? Why didn't McConnell rise to what the Senate required of him in the face of Trump?
Lawrence, thanks for having me. Given your Senate experience, this is a great place to discuss the book and the Senate. I think what happened was basically that McConnell had his agenda, some of which coincided with Trump's, some of which actually went beyond Trump's. But McConnell regarded this as an opportunity to cut taxes for the rich, attack the Affordable Care Act, but most importantly, turn the Supreme Court far to the right. Those were his objectives. And obviously, with the exception of the Affordable Care Act, he accomplished them very well.
There is a passage toward the end of your book which is really haunting. It says about McConnell, he will be principally remembered for remaking the Supreme Court, orchestrating Trump's acquittal in 2 impeachment trials, and standing by while Trump provided unhinged leadership during the pandemic and trashed our democracy on his way out the door. But McConnell's legacy is far broader and more damaging to our country. How could his legacy be more damaging than what you just described?
Well, those are the major elements of his legacy that I described. But I remind people that long before Donald Trump came down the escalator in 2015 to run for president, we had a broken politics and a dysfunctional Senate. McConnell, in the 8 years of President Obama, did great damage to the country through his obstruction. So he is not only guilty of the things that I've mentioned, but he was the leading opponent, for instance, for climate change policies. He is the person who has done the most damage to the campaign finance system. And he is a person who, after 2013 at Sandy Hook, when 5-year-old and 6-year-old children were killed, he's a person who made sure that we would have no gun control legislation. So his legacy is a broad one. And while I write about the 4 years of the Trump presidency, because I regard that as a catastrophic failure of government by the Senate, his legacy is far broader and far darker.
And you write of other majority leaders in here, the legendary Mike Mansfield, who had bipartisan admiration, Howard Baker, Republican, who also had bipartisan respect and admiration as a majority leader, Bob Dole. And in none of those models did we see the model for the way Mitch McConnell has operated as a leader in the Senate.
No, I think that's right, Lawrence. I mean, Senate leaders always regarded themselves as having a special responsibility to work with presidents, whoever was in power, to work across the aisle in the Senate, to basically find common ground. McConnell has been the exact opposite. I think of him as an architect of division, basically. Whenever you could bring people together, he chose instead to pull them apart and exacerbate the differences, which made him particularly disastrous when we had Trump as president. Now, it's ironic to me, and I'm sure to you, that this is someone who spent his 22 years trying to become a Senate leader. That was his goal, and he accomplished it. He's a phenomenal strategist and tactician, and he's very patient. And yet he took that position and then went on to bring the Senate down and to divide the country. And it's striking that a person of his talents would do so little to bring us together.
It is Thursday, the 19th of May of 2022, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef. And our daily special is Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. A little bit of jambalaya, a little bit of spice in your life. We got some spice for you. So, looks like Trump still wants Dr. Oz. Doctor? That guy's still a doctor? Shouldn't they have pulled his license by now? Maybe they have. I guess it's an honorific, like colonel, to somebody in the South who's never been in the military, but they always call him colonel. Anyway, Trump is insisting that Oz just declare victory, and any of the rest of the, 40,000 votes yet to be counted were all fake. You know, because Trump figures once you're like slightly in the lead, that's when you call victory, and then anything that comes after that, hey, it's stacked against me. Yikes. Why do we allow people who purport to know nothing about how our civics works become leaders and pontificators and, I don't know, kingmakers? Yeah, kingmaker. That's the key right there. Not president, king. Trump thinks he's a kingmaker, and he's God. Only God can create kings, right? Presidents. Then we got this Mastriano guy. Comes from military intel. What's up with military intel grooming all these Christo-fascists like Mastriano and Flynn? And Flynn's brother, by the way. Yeah, we have something related to that coming up in the salon that we call West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Indeed. I just want to know what's up with that. Seems like there's a lot of this Christo-fascism going around. I thought there was like, the Air Force, for instance, was being taken to task. Did they just decide not to do anything about it? Or are they promoting it? And if that's the case, that is at odds with our constitutional representative democracy, and I don't think that's allowed. And that's another reason why the founder said no standing armies. Well, he said no party systems either. Talk about original intent. Why don't they follow that? No way. And once again, a militia had an armory, okay? And it wasn't at each individual's home. Oh, I'm just going to have my armory at home. No, your armory is over there at the armory. God, these people. And they're supposed to be the real patriots. They're going to take America back. Back to what? You genocided the original inhabitants here. That's supposed to be a godlike thing? I guess so. Gods can do that. Whisk of a hand. Oh, it's like a flood. A flood of Europeans growing across the continent of the United States, suffocating everything in its path. And we did. All right. Well, what else is going on? Here. Some things that came across my transom this morning. Cruz, Ted Cruz is hit with a 15-page ethics complaint. They want him disbarred. Well, apparently they did it with Rudy. And they're going to hit Cruz with the same ethics charge that Rudy was charged with, which was, I think, being part of a violent overthrow of the United States of America. I think it was something like that. Orban is speaking to CPAC because, CPAC is there. Right-wing, autocratic, authoritarian Orban. Well, he's telling the kids from CPAC that they need to recruit troops to reconquer American institutions. And I want to know what reconquer means. And why is somebody who's a right-wing Nazi, because, Serb Gorka comes from there too, and he's a Hungarian Nazi. Why are they using these kids as assets to, quote, recruit troops, end quote, to conquer American institutions? And we're not talking the institution of Disneyland here, okay? And I got to tell you, before DeSantis did all this BS, I probably wouldn't have been adverse to conquering Disneyland. And World, too. All right? Anybody say anything about the Paris Disney World? Nobody? Come on, man. That's a huge place. Anyway, I don't know how. I would hope. Let's back up just a tad here. I would hope that apparatus in our government might, put some tabs on these kids coming back from this talk with Orban. Maybe, track what their behaviors might do and be. Be and do? I don't know. Where am I? Wouldn't that be a prudent thing? Because I fear that we are playing with major fire here. Is there a wonder why the Republicans fought against limiting dark money from foreign powers, hostile or not? There's a reason that they fought against that. And they won, apparently. They were able to quash this disinfo part of DHS that was not anything to do with tracking you in your home to make sure that you're not clicking on Stormfront. Yeah, that's what the repugs were arguing. Is that government's going to be big brother, and they're going to like track my clicks when I click on Stormfront, when I'm just doing like some research, personal research about Stormfront, or whatever they're called now, Patriot Front. No, they were tasked with tackling state actors and their disinfo. Of course, the repugs couched the argument as one of an infringement upon personal freedoms, which is rich when they're considering taking away personal freedoms from all the women in America right now. And their fellow travelers, too. You know, women do have fellow travelers. When in actuality, what they're fighting against is them being caught up working for hostile foreign actors to destroy the United States of America from within. And what is that called? That's right. It's an insurgency. And we need a rat hunt to get rid of all these insurgents. I call them Nazis for short. Insurgent Nazis. Yeah, white nationalists. They just string it all on. It's just easier to call them Nazis. Now, this Nazi from Pennsylvania who's running for governor, I want to know what it is. I still don't understand what it is about military intelligence that grooms these Christo-fascists. You got the Flynn brothers, and one Flynn brother's still in command. And we have an a related topic to that today. Flynn gets pardoned and is walking free at this very moment, and his brother has a major command. And they're Christo-fascists, and this guy Mastriano is Christo-fascist, and he thinks or believes that he was sent from God to smite all the sinners. I don't want no dome-head Christo-fascist telling me that he knows about, I don't know, spiritual matters. I'm sorry. This guy's not Thomas Merton. All right? Oh, boy. He's right out of the Spanish Inquisition, if you think about it. That's what these people want to do. They want to have public torture sessions for all the sinners who decided that, I don't know, they're listening to that jiggly jazz music. I was looking at a Nazi regulation about what kind of music could be played, and boy, now I have some apparent Germanic blood, if that has any bearing on the matter. But it does kind of crack me up how it was very codified. I mean, how many beats per measure of syncopated music that you could listen to? And they were quite racist in the way that they ascribed certain types of beats, rhythms, and measures to the darker races, shall we say. Not allowed. And so I don't know. This guy's out of military intel, Mastriano, so he might be an ordered personality who would be able to affect such. Trump was never in the military. He was in a military-themed school because he was a juvenile delinquent. Boy, that sure seems to go around. Bunch of juvenile delinquents get a bunch of money in any means necessary, usually by subterfuge. And then they think they know the secret to the universe and they're next to God. I'm going to take over the world now. Not a Byron among them. I mean, if you're going to do that, be at least a Byron. Jeez. Get a Navy. All right? You can't be a enlightened despot without a Navy. Okay, enough of that. Why don't we get into a more ordered part of the show? Yes, ordered. Because we have actually curated a show for you, as we do 5 days a week here on Netroots Radio. West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. All right. Well, at the top, yes, Mitch McConnell wrecked the Senate under Trump, and some might argue he wrecked it under Obama. On the rest of the menu, as we start off in the Bistro Cafe part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, 203 House Republicans voted against bolstering federal resources to prevent domestic terrorism in response to the racist mass shooting in Buffalo, New York. They vote against dark money coming from hostile foreign powers. They vote against making sure disinformation from hostile foreign powers is stopped at the border or before. And now, we don't want to have anything to put racist mass murderers in check. Oh, no, not that. A Wisconsin man was sentenced to 10 years in prison for a racist acid attack. Yeah, a report came out that a lot of that's been going around. Not just acid attacks, just an uptick in right-wing domestic violence. No wonder the repugs don't want us to know anything about it until it's too late for us. And the Defense Department Inspector General determined the Vindman brothers suffered swift and severe retaliation from Trump over the Ukraine call. You know, that perfect one. And the Flynns are still walking around, and one of the Flynn brothers is still in command, and the Vindman brothers got drummed out of the military. Pretty quick, too. After the break, we moved to the chef's table where Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen said the United States does not have the legal authority to seize frozen Russian central bank assets. Well, let's keep taking the oligarchs' yachts, okay? I like that. That's more fun anyway. And the Department of Justice charged 1 American and 4 Chinese officials with spying. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. To the right of the page is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. So chat, she's there. Mostly, even though she's very, very busy. But thank you, Kelly, for everything that you are doing. If you out there in listening land would look across the homepage, near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, to the left of that chat room link, there is the Patreon link, and if you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, it helps. It really does. If you could afford to send us what you might spend on an espresso-type coffee drink, even in these inflationary times, if you could send those funds to us once a month, it really does help us pay our bills. And the bills keep increasing in cost. There's never a limited supply of price increases on bills. It's baked in, as they say. But anyway, your help really does help, and we need the help. So thank you for your help. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that. Thank you, Tom. Follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam. I'm trying to clean my glasses. And if you follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam, I post the show notes and links diary there that gets posted on Daily Cuz about 10 minutes before showtime, automatically, by the way. And then I get that linked up, like I mentioned, on Twitter and other social media platforms. And the show notes and links is where the real reportage can be found of the articles that we are riffing on here at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Yeah. You can follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West and pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes. Really, wherever podcasts can be found. And, of course, you can find what we like to call the Deep State Archive of the Netroots Radio Library at the Internet Archive at archive.org. 11 years. That's right. That's a lot of shows. Okay, this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is out of the Associated Press by Farnoosh Amiri and Kevin Frecking. The House passed legislation late last night, which was Wednesday night, by the way, that would bolster federal resources to prevent domestic terrorism in response to the racist mass shooting in Buffalo, New York. The 222 to 203 nearly party line vote was an answer to the growing pressure Congress faces to address gun violence and white supremacist attacks, a crisis that escalated following 2 mass shootings over the weekend. Representative Adam Kinzinger, a member of the Congressional Committee investigating the attack on the U.S. Capitol, was the lone Republican to vote in favor of the measure. But the legislative effort by Democrats is not new. The House passed a similar measure in 2020, only to have it languish in the Senate. And since lawmakers lack the support in the Senate to move forward with any sort of gun control legislation they see as necessary to stop mass shootings, Democrats are instead putting their efforts into a broader federal focus on domestic terrorism. And the Repug's argument is that, well, you're calling us terrorists. And we're saying, yeah. Since you are not keeping your people in check, and in fact you are inciting them to even more violence, something has to be done now, doesn't it? And of course they're saying, no, you can't regulate me. You can't tell me what to do. All right, so much for law and order, huh? Supporters of the bill say it will fill the gaps in intelligence sharing among the Justice Department, Department of Homeland Security, and the FBI so that officials can better track and respond to the growing threat of white extremist terrorism. And that's exactly what the Repugs argued against the Homeland Security Information Office that was tasked with making sure hostile foreign nations don't flood our society with disinformation like, oh, go ahead and take this particular kind of medicine with this other compound when it's poison, if you combine the two. That's what that agency was tasked with doing, letting people know if our water supply had been poisoned. Hacking into our power grid. The Repugs stopped efforts to stop that. And now they're saying the same thing, because what that disinformation agency was tasked with doing was sharing information among the Justice Department, the DHS, and you got to know, DHS is sprawling. And the idea was to be able to get that information to all those agencies in the DHS, as well as the FBI, so that they can better track hostile foreign powers trying to take over our country. And the Repugs voted against that and quashed it. And now they're doing this so that we can't track white domestic terrorism. Well, according to Elon Musk, this is just further proof about how much Democrats hate America. Todd Richmond of the AP brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Metro Shrimp and Grist Thursdays. A judge sentenced a white Wisconsin man to a decade in prison for throwing acid in a Latino man's face in a racist attack at a Milwaukee bus stop. Milwaukee County Circuit Judge Jean-Marie Kreese told 64-year-old Clifton Blackwell that he acted with hate when he threw the acid on Mahoud Villalaz in November of 2019. She said he was not provoked and that his behavior was diabolical. We are all different from one another. When we let those differences cloud our judgment, that's bias or prejudice or discrimination, and in this instance, it is hate, the judge told Blackwell. I'm sure the acid was absolutely painful, and you caused him emotional distress that I think is never going to heal. You made him feel he's not worthy, and that's diabolical. Villalez testified that the vision in his left eye was permanently damaged by the attack, and the judge said he suffered second-degree burns. Blackwell attended the hearing in a wheelchair, dressed in a jail jumpsuit. Asked if he had anything to say before the sentence was handed down, he said, Villalez still scares me very much. I regret that it all happened, he said. I'm still scared I could drop dead of a heart attack right now. As far as I know, I would definitely do it differently, you little punk. Blackwell's attorney, Michael Plaisted, asked Kreese to sentence Blackwell to 2 to 3 years in prison. He argued that Blackwell is not part of any hate group, and he was carrying the acid only to protect himself. Okay, Second Amendment right to carry acid to protect yourself. All right. He noted that Blackwell had been diagnosed with multiple personality disorders. Oh, the white man defense. Of the Washington Post brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Army Colonel Yevgeny Vindman, who along with his twin brother raised alarm about Trump's actions towards Ukraine, precipitating the first of 2 impeachments, suffered a swift reduction in responsibilities in advising the White House and probably was punished for speaking out, according to the findings of an investigation released yesterday, Wednesday. The Defense Department Inspector General's office determined it was more likely than not, that's one way of equivocating, isn't it, that Vindman, an Army officer who in 2019 was assigned to the National Security Council, was the subject of unfavorable personnel actions, and that these were in reprisal for his protected communications with superiors. They saw something wrong, they passed it up the chain of command, as they had been ordered to do. The subject of Vindman's concern was a call in which Trump implored Ukrainian President Zelensky to have the government in Kyiv open a corruption investigation of Trump's political rival Joe Biden. Oh, yeah, remember that? The perfect call. The Inspector General's office recommended no action be taken in Vindman's case, noting that Army officials promoted him to his current rank last year and removed an unfavorable performance review that Trump administration officials had issued. Vindman and his brother, Alexander, were among those dismissed from their jobs by National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien in February of 2020. shortly after Trump's first impeachment trial ended with a Senate acquittal in spite of all the evidence. Trump stood accused of abusing his authority by seeking to withhold military aid intended for Ukraine. Vindman said in a phone interview last night that he was gratified by the Inspector General's decision, but would like to see U.S. officials consider action against those cited in the report. His career was adversely affected by the situation, he said. He suggested that a review of whether they should keep security clearances might be one option. What happened to me and my brother is an outrage, one of many committed by the former president and his staff, Vindman said. All right, let's get to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
Hi, and welcome to COVID Quickly, a Scientific American podcast series.
This is your fast-track update on the COVID pandemic. We bring you up to speed on the science behind the most urgent questions about the virus and the disease. We demystify the research and help you understand what it really means.
I'm Tanya Lewis.
I'm Josh Fishman.
And we're Scientific American's senior health editors. Today, how to care for yourself when you're sick at home with COVID.
And how do you know when it's just spring allergies making you sneeze and not the virus?
These days, I keep hearing about people getting COVID and riding it out at home. If you have a relatively mild case, what should you do to take care of yourself?
More and more people are in exactly that situation, Tanya. The daily average of new cases has been going up from about 50,000 at the end of April to just over 80,000 today. But a lot fewer people are ending up in the hospital, just under 20,000 at the end of last week.
Well, that's good, but that means more people with COVID are taking care of themselves at home, right?
Yep. So what's the best way to do that? What helps with symptoms? How do you handle isolation? I asked Scientific American contributing editor Lydia Denworth to look into that. She spoke with several doctors who treat COVID and came up with some good tips.
Even though we call these mild cases, people say it's often like 2 weeks of the worst flu you can imagine, with fevers and racking coughs.
True. So first of all, note your symptoms. Timothy Brewer, an epidemiologist at UCLA, told Lydia that there's a wide range, but a lot of them hit your upper respiratory system. That's where Omicron and its subvariants like to replicate. So there's less chest and lung inflammation and more sore throats and congestion. Achiness, coughing, shortness of breath, and fever are also common.
I'd probably want to test myself if I started feeling bad. Should I use a rapid antigen test?
These symptoms can look like bad allergies or the flu, so experts say use an antigen test after the symptoms start. If the first test is negative, do another one 2 days later. If the virus is building up inside you, the second test will probably pick it up.
Okay, so I'm positive and feeling positively awful. Time to call my doctor?
Well, not everyone has a primary care doc, but if you do, call yours. They can advise you on medications. They'll also notify public health agencies so you're included in case counts.
After that, is there anything in my medicine cabinet that might help me?
Probably, or over the counter at your local drugstore. Common drugs don't fight the virus, but they do manage symptoms. Acetaminophen brings down fevers and relieves achiness. So do non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, NSAIDs, like ibuprofen. Antihistamines or cold medications like Dayquil relieve congestion and cough.
People should be more careful with NSAIDs, though. They have more side effects than acetaminophen, and they're not safe for everyone. I know the label instructions are in tiny print, but it's a good idea to read them. You should probably check with your doctor if you're taking other drugs, too.
Sometimes I take a picture of the label with my cell phone and blow it up. That helps. Another thing that helps? Good old TLC. Rest and drink fluids. That prevents dehydration and reduces cough. Hot tea with honey alleviates sore throat and cough too.
What about prescription drugs like the new antiviral pill Paxlovid?
That helps if you start taking it early, but it's not for everyone. You can't use it with many common medications such as statins or blood thinners. Some monoclonal antibodies also reduce the risk of severe disease, but they require an injection or an infusion. And not every patient is eligible. Both treatments have been authorized for people who are at higher risk for severe illness because of their age, 65 and older, or underlying health conditions such as high blood pressure or lung disease. There's no evidence yet that these treatments benefit people who are young or otherwise healthy.
Bad news for me, I guess. What happens if you live by yourself, though? Lots of people do, some of them young and some older. Being alone with COVID can be scary.
I know. And if you don't have a partner to make drugstore runs and food runs, it's really tough. Brewer says it's smart to arrange to have someone call you once a day to check up. The check-ins can reduce anxiety and loneliness because you're isolating for at least 5 days. Friends and family shouldn't get physically close, but they can drop off meals, or they can drop off Tylenol and other OTC medications, as well as some books, magazines, or TV show recs to fill the hours.
So you do this for 5 days after symptoms start and a positive test. Then, if you feel better, you can go out, but should wear a high-quality mask like an N95 and do that for another 5 days. That's 10 days total. Are there warning signs in that period that could lead you to call for medical help?
Excellent question. Doctors told Lydia that the big thing to watch for is serious trouble breathing, chest pain, blue lips, if you can't swallow liquids, or if you get winded after taking a few steps in your bedroom. All reasons to get over to urgent care or to call 911. Most people won't run into this kind of trouble, but do not be shy about reaching out for help if you do.
Josh, it's been a rough allergy season. I find myself sniffling and sneezing constantly and have gone through more tissue boxes than I care to admit. But given all the COVID swirling around, I'm constantly paranoid that the virus has finally found me. Of course, the only way to know for sure whether you have COVID is a positive test. But tests aren't always available, and it can take days to test positive on a rapid test, even if you already have symptoms.
It does seem to be a rough allergy season. So how can you tell the difference between COVID and allergies?
Actually, freelance contributor Mariana Lenaro asked experts this very question for a story we published recently. The symptoms are pretty similar: nasal congestion, runny nose, sore throat, sneezing, coughing, headaches, and fatigue. But there are some pretty key differences.
Fever is one of them, right?
Right. It's not a common feature of allergies, so that's one giveaway. Another is sudden and severe smell loss. This was a common feature with earlier variants of the coronavirus, but is less common with Omicron. Still, allergies are unlikely to cause complete smell loss, and watery, puffy eyes are common with allergies, but less so with COVID.
That's helpful. So if I have a fever or any symptoms less common with allergies, should I take a COVID test?
Yes. Thinking about your own body and the context in which you started having symptoms is also important. Like, if you just mowed the lawn and started sneezing, it's probably allergies. But if you recently attended an indoor event with 200 people talking loudly, it could be COVID.
Do we know anything about whether people who have allergies are more susceptible to COVID, or even vice versa?
At first, scientists were worried that people who have allergic asthma were more likely to get infected with COVID and have a severe case, something that could happen with the flu. But a study published in the journal Thorax found the opposite, that people with allergic asthma may be at a lower risk of COVID infection than other people. And some studies show that people with allergic asthma appear to have lower levels of a receptor for the COVID-causing virus.
Well, that's good news. Is there anything we can do to protect against both COVID and allergies?
Wear a mask. It might spare you some sniffles, or worse. Now you're up to speed. Thanks for joining us. Our show is edited by Tulika Bose and Jeff Del Vicio.
Come back in 2 weeks for the next episode of COVID Quickly, and check out Siam.com for updated and in-depth COVID news.
Hi, it's Tom.
could we humbly suggest your donation to netrootsradio.com? All we've got to run this 24-hour powerhouse of progressive resistance radio is what comes out of our own wallets. And you are our biggest donor. And it doesn't take much, $3, $5. Just go to the bottom of our netrootsradio.com page and hit our secure donate button. Heck, you can even make a recurring contribution. So donate what you'd like at the bottom of our netrootsradio.com's homepage. Because you are our biggest donor. netrootsradio.com. Together, we are Resistance Radio.
Welcome to 60 Second Civics, the daily podcast of the Center for Civic Education. I'm Mark Gage. George Washington strongly supported the principle that the military is subordinate to civilian government. The most important public example of this occurred at the end of the Revolution, when Washington returned his commission, the symbol of his authority, to Congress. At the time he took this step, his popularity and power over the army might have permitted him to seize control of the government, as victorious generals had done before and have often done since. Julius Caesar in ancient Rome, Oliver Cromwell in England, and Napoleon Bonaparte in France were all successful military leaders who found the temptation of political power irresistible. Washington so strongly established the precept that the military serves the people of the nation and their civilian government that there has never been a threat to the American government from its own military. That's all for today's podcast, 60 Second Civics, where civic education only takes a minute.
If and when the Supreme Court reverses Roe, who will suffer? I'm Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute. And the list of who will suffer is a long list that includes victims of rape, victims of incest, victims of domestic violence, teenagers, low-income workers, women of color, immigrants without documents, really all members of marginalized groups. In contrast, for the wealthy, the right to choose will, for the most part, remain relatively intact. They will be able to access that health care. They will have the wherewithal to travel. That's obviously not the case for women who literally can't afford to miss work, for single moms who can't leave their kids, for women who don't have money to travel and live in a state that has criminalized buying abortion pills. What are they to do? Studies show that women unable to access abortion disproportionately are women of color, who, denied an abortion, are much more likely to live in poverty, be unemployed, and be unable to escape violent male partners. In addition, a nationwide abortion ban, one study shows, would increase pregnancy-related deaths by 21%, 33% among black women, who already are 2.5 times more likely to die in childbirth than white women. Which means that overruling Roe may well initiate a death spiral for women, as well as a potential death spiral for constitutional rights. The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU, because freedom can't protect itself.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1920. That year, a national coal strike had won unionized miners a 27% pay raise. But the miners in West Virginia were not in the union. The United Mine Workers decided to launch an intensive campaign to organize this important coal mining region. It took courage to join the union. If the coal operators found out, you would be fired and thrown out of company housing. And so today in labor history, detectives from the infamous Baldwin Felts Company came to Matawan to evict miners who worked for the Stone Mountain Coal Company. Local police chief Sid Hatfield supported the workers. He showed up where the detectives were eating dinner with a warrant for the detectives' arrest. The detectives quickly produced their own warrant for Sid Hatfield's arrest. The two sides stood in the street in a standoff. Then, suddenly, a shot rang out. Miners dueled with the coal operators' hired guns. When the smoke cleared, 7 detectives and 2 miners were killed. Among the dead was Albert Feltz, one of the detectives who had earlier participated in the Ludlow massacre in Colorado. Sid Hatfield survived the gun battle and became a national folk hero. The next year, he was assassinated for his role in Matawan. 10,000 angry miners took up arms in what has been called the largest insurrection since the Civil War. The fighting culminated in the Battle of Blair Mountain, where an estimated 1 million rounds were fired between the miners and the company's hired guns before the U.S. Army intervened and ended the battle. In 1987, John Sayles directed an acclaimed film based on the events in West Virginia. Matawan became a classic, must-see film about the labor movement. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. A little bit of jambalaya, a little bit of spice in your life. We always begin, whether from around the world, along the banks of the Rogue River, in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 50 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting only a high of about 60 today. Looks like we'll have sun and clouds mixed, though, and winds will be out of the north-northwest at 10 to 15 miles per hour, and that may be the reason we're having a bit cooler temperatures. Partly cloudy skies overnight with lows at a chilly 37 degrees Fahrenheit. And winds will continue out of the north-northwest at 10 to 15, and then mainly sunny tomorrow with temperatures warming up to a high of around 72 or so, and winds will have shifted out of the north and decreased down to their usual 5 to 10 miles per hour. Confirmed cases of coronavirus in Jackson County in the southern part of Oregon have been updated finally from last Friday. We now stand at 437,052 cases, and that is an increase of, looks like over 100. And those are only the ones that have been reported because, as I've mentioned before, now that people think that they can just test at home, they don't need to report anything to the county. So we may have more infections than what's actually reported, but this is what the county has, and we're increasing. And it looks like our deceased have also increased by 4, and we now stand at 537 confirmed deceased from this insidious disease. 1 million dead. 1 million. Well, it looks like grass pollen is rated very high right outside the window here in Rogue River proper. And I got to tell you, I was sneezing yesterday. The air quality index, though, is in the good range at 30 parts per million. And as I have mentioned before, that just gives people the idea they can burn their trash and foul the air. And that's exactly what they did yesterday when we had really nice, sweet air to breathe, and then they had to start burning their trash. Grrr. And to add insult to injury, the daytime UV index is in the high range at level 7, so you better slather on the 50 SPF or greater. Whatever they tell you to do now, all right? I like to cover up with some long sleeves and a hat. Barometric pressure is rising at 30.27 inches. Visibility is up to 10 miles, and relative humidity is down to 60%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. London is 71 degrees and sunny. Paris is 80 degrees and fair. Rome is 80 degrees and fair. Kyiv is 70 degrees and mostly cloudy. Kabul is 68 and partly cloudy. Hong Kong is 78 and fair. Tokyo is 68 and fair. Sydney, Australia is 55 and mostly cloudy. San Francisco, California is 58 degrees and fair. And New York, New York is 56 degrees Fahrenheit and cloudy. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. David Lauder of Reuters brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. The United States does not have legal authority to seize Russian central bank assets frozen due to its invasion of Ukraine, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen said, but talks with U.S. partners over ways to make Russia foot the bill for Ukraine's post-war reconstruction are starting. Yellen also said it is likely that the special license granted to allow Russia to make payments to its U.S. bondholders would not be extended when it expires next week, leaving Russian officials a fast narrowing window to avoid its first external debt default since the 1917 Russian Revolution.
Je te donne, c'est mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer. Mes automnes, quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Staff at Reuters brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. A U.S. citizen and 4 Chinese intelligence officers have been charged with spying on Chinese dissidents, human rights leaders, and pro-democracy activists residing in the United States, the Department of Justice said yesterday, Wednesday. The indictment accuses Wang Xiaojun of Queens, New York, of using his status within the Chinese diaspora and dissident communities to collect information about activists on behalf of China's Ministry of State Security, known as the MSS. Wang, age 73, was arrested on March 16th and will be arraigned at a later date. The 4 MSS officials who the department named are Feng He, Ji Ji, Ming Li, and Keijing Lu are still at large, it added. The indictment was unsealed on Tuesday in federal court in Brooklyn. Wang has provided information to the MSS since at least 2011, the indictment alleges. The MSS officials directed Wang to target Hong Kong pro-democracy activists, activists for Taiwanese independence, and Uyghur and Tibetan activists, the indictment says. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day. But you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here tomorrow for Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we will meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. À fleurs sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.